Welcome to the debate. In 1990, the British government viewed English football fans as as a literal national security threat.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sport was completely synonymous with violence, stadium tragedies, and just this incredibly toxic brand of hooliganism.
It was a really bleak era.
It was. Yet the moment that effectively saved English football, the moment that modernized a global sport and shifted its entire cultural standing, it wasn't a police crackdown. It wasn't some sweeping legislative reform.
No.
It was a 23-year-old kid from Newcastle standing on a pitch in Turin with his bottom lip trembling, crying his eyes out.
It really is the ultimate subversion of the traditional British stiff upper lip. I mean, we generally gravitate toward monuments of stoic triumph, a trophy lifted, a captain standing tall.
Right.
But here, the enduring image is absolute vulnerability.
Exactly. And today, drawing entirely from historical accounts, journalistic retrospectives, and statistical analysis of the 1990 World Cup tournament in Italy, Italia 90, we're dissecting the legacy of that summer.
And it's a legacy that is still hotly contested.
It is. So the central question we are exploring is this. Was the defining story of Italia 90 Paul Gascoigne's individual heroism and emotional vulnerability? Or was the true narrative the collective performance, the profound tactical resiliences, and the overarching footballing reality of Bobby Robson's team?
Right, the team versus the individual.
Exactly. I will be making the case that Paul Gascoigne was the singular hero, the emotional and technical fulcrum who literally transcended the sport itself.
And I will argue that the romanticization of Gascoigne, entirely understandable. It drastically obscures the actual footballing reality. The true story of Italia 90 is one of collective tactical pragmatism, extreme resilience under fire, and crucial, calculated contributions from an incredibly scrutinized squad.
Okay, so let's lay the groundwork by looking at the sociocultural context of Britain heading into that summer.
Yeah, that's vital.
Because if you're listening to this and your memory of Italian 90 is just the joyous highlight reel of Gaza's tears, it's easy to forget just how dark the backdrop was.
Oh, it was incredibly grim.
This was a nation in absolute turmoil. You had 250,000 people on the streets of London violently protesting the poll tax.
You had a country profoundly traumatized by the horrors of the Hillsborough disaster where 96 people died. And the Heysel disaster before that. Football was infected with what Europe called the English disease.
Right. Hooliganism was just rooted in this very violent, unyielding hypermasculinity.
Exactly. And the government, Margaret Thatcher's administration in particular, they treated fans with extreme suspicion. They even considered an ID card scheme to track anyone entering a stadium.
The sport was essentially viewed as a public order problem, not an entertainment industry, a problem.
Precisely. And against that incredibly bleak landscape, Paul Gascoigne emerges. He brought this raw, working-class charm and an unpredictable brilliance on the ball. But more importantly, he brought a deeply vulnerable humanity.
I mean, he was definitely unique.
He was. His tears in the semifinal after receiving that yellow card didn't just happen in a vacuum. Those tears short-circuited the entire cultural narrative. Like, how can a sport be defined solely by violent hypermasculinity when its greatest star is weeping on global television?
Yeah, it's quite the contrast.
It completely dismantled the toxic reputation of the 1980s. Sociologists note that he helped birth the new man culture in Britain, this idea that showing emotion was a strength, not a weakness. He didn't just play a good tournament, he united a fractured nation.
I absolutely acknowledge the cultural shift that occurred that summer. I really do. But attributing it entirely to one man's emotional display, it does a massive disservice to the structural realities of the tournament and the team.
A disservice?
Yes. The romanticization of Gazamania completely overshadows Bobby Robson's incredible managerial feat. I come at it from a different way.
Okay, let's hear it.
That cultural shift, the embrace of the new man and the softening of the government's stance, that was a byproduct of the team's unexpected collective success, not the catalyst for it.
You think it was just a byproduct?
Absolutely. The sports minister at the time, Colin Moynihan, had literally encouraged the Italian police to be extremely firm with England's supporters. The establishment fully expected a disaster both on and off the pitch.
Well, sure, expectations were low.
Low? Before the tournament, the press labeled the squad as rubbish and donkeys. There were open, aggressive calls for Robson to resign. One publication literally yelled on its front page, "Go in the name of God, go."
Yeah, the media environment was definitely venomous, I'll give you that.
Venomous is an understatement. What changed the establishment's mind wasn't a player crying. What changed their minds was the team grinding out results. What actually happened in Italy was a masterclass in collective survival.
But survival isn't exactly glamorous.
Maybe not, but statistically, the 1990 World Cup was the most defensive, cynical tournament in history. It had the lowest goals per game ratio ever recorded, at just 2.21. 15 matches ended in a 1-0 scoreline.
It was definitely a tough watch at times.
Right. England was an incomplete squad with a notoriously leaky defense, and yet Bobby Robson implemented crucial tactical shifts to survive all that.
You're talking about the shift to the sweeper system.
Exactly. And for those who look at modern, fluid formations, it's hard to overstate what a massive gamble shifting to a sweeper system was for an English manager in 1990. English football was rigidly devoted to the flat back four.
Yeah, the 4-4-2 formation was almost a religion over there.
Shifting to a system where you have a libero, a free defender sweeping up mistakes behind the main defensive line, it was incredibly foreign to these players. Yet Robson deployed Mark Wright in that role to mask their defensive deficiencies.
And they did manage a 0-0 draw with the Netherlands in the group stage.
Which was huge. The Dutch team was loaded with superstars like Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten. It was deemed an enthralling moral victory. They scraped a 1-0 win over Egypt.
True.
The overarching narrative is a heavily criticized group of men pulling together under a despised manager, navigating a tournament defined by a paralyzing fear of losing and somehow pushing through.
I see what you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how that national pride was actually restored.
Go ahead.
The tactical shifts, the implementation of a sweeper system, grinding out a 0-0 draw against the Dutch, none of that would have mattered to the wider public if the team didn't have a beating emotional core. And Gascoigne provided that core.
But the results are what kept them on television.
Just look at how the author Salman Rushdie framed it after the tournament. He wrote, before Paul Gascoigne, did anyone ever become a national hero and a dead cert millionaire by crying? Fabulous. Weep and the world weeps with you.
It's a great quote.
It is. This wasn't just a footballing phenomenon. It was a cultural revolution. Dr. Thomas Dixon, analyzing the concept of weeping Britannia, pointed out that Gaza perfectly merged the traditional heavy-drinking lad with this emotional new man.
Which definitely captured the media's attention.
It completely softened the government's stance. Margaret Thatcher, who was a stern opponent of football's influence, ended up being pictured alongside Gascoigne at number 10 Downing Street. Do you think Thatcher invites a team of pragmatic defenders to Downing Street if Gascoigne doesn't capture the nation's heart?
They don't get invited to Downing Street if they go out in the group stages, no matter how many tears are shed. That's my point. The aesthetics only matter if you survive.
But cultural impact requires screen time. Gaza doesn't become a cultural icon if England goes home early, I agree. But to understand his true value, we have to look at how close they came to vanishing entirely. We have to look at the quarterfinal against Cameroon in Naples.
Yes, let's talk about the match that almost sent them packing. This match perfectly illustrates my point about collective resilience over individual heroism.
And I would argue it perfectly illustrates mine. If you want to talk about Gascoigne's heroism, look at his absolute dominance in that quarterfinal. This was a crucible.
Dominance is a strong word.
But it's true. In that match, Gaza completed 13 successful dribbles. To put that in historical perspective, that is the joint second all-time in a single World Cup match, right behind J.J. Okocha in 94 and tied with Jair Zeno in 70. He was absolutely everywhere on the pitch.
He was definitely active.
He provided the assist for David Platt's opening goal. Think of Robson's defensive setup, that sweeper system you praised, like a locked vault. It was incredibly difficult for other teams to break into, but it also heavily restricted England, trapping them inside their own defensive shape.
It was a necessary trade-off.
Sure, but Gascoigne wasn't just a spark plug for this team. He was the safecracker. He was the only player with the irrational confidence to pick up the ball deep in his own half, beat 3 men, and single-handedly break England out of their own defensive prison.
The safecracker, really?
Yes, when the team was exhausted and out of ideas in extra time, it was his palatial pass that freed Gary Lineker to win the decisive penalty.
Wait, you're bringing up the 13 dribbles and the palatial pass, but you're conveniently leaving out the fact that he was the primary reason they were almost eliminated in the first place.
He was just trying to win the ball back in a desperate situation.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You're giving Gascoigne the credit for survival, but his impetuous, blundering foul on Roger Milla is exactly what conceded the penalty, allowing Emmanuel Koundé to equalize for Cameroon.
It was a mistimed tackle. It happens.
It was completely reckless. And a few minutes later, Milla exposes the English defense again, setting up Eugene Akeke. Suddenly, England are down 2-1. There are 7 minutes left in the match.
Which is when Gascoigne really turned it on.
The entire nation back home is preparing for a humiliating exit to an African nation, which at the time was considered unthinkable by the British press.
The true story of this match isn't Gaza's dribbling stats or your safecracker metaphor.
Then what is it? It's the collective survival against a Cameroon team that was playing with unbelievable fluidity and absolutely no fear. The reason England survived wasn't just Gaz's passing, it was the incredibly calculated veteran heroics of Gary Lineker.
Lineker scored the penalties, yes, but without Gascoigne's unpredictable energy driving them forward, Lineker never even gets into the penalty area to win them. The engine stalls completely.
But let's talk about the psychological execution of those penalties, because this is the crux of tactical resilience. Lineker had a tried and trusted penalty routine his entire career. He almost always smashed the ball as hard as possible to the goalkeeper's left.
Yeah, it was pure muscle memory.
Exactly. But before the match, Bobby Robson had warned him that Cameroon had a spy operating in the stadium during England's practice sessions. The Cameroonian goalkeeper, Thomas Nkono, knew Lineker's tendencies.
Right, the spy stuff.
So put yourself in Lineker's shoes. Your heart rate is 180 beats per minute. You are 7 minutes away from World Cup elimination, and in the highest pressure moment of your career, you intentionally decide to go against years of ingrained muscle memory.
It's definitely a bold move.
He changes his routine. He shoots to the right. He scores. Then in extra time, he gets another penalty. He does it again. He shoots to the right again. He completely outsmarts Nkono twice.
It takes immense psychological fortitude. I won't deny that.
It is the definition of veteran savvy. That is Bobby Robson's intelligence gathering paying off. Robson himself said after the game, "We pulled it out of the fire and I don't really know how."
It was a very chaotic finish.
That frantic collective survival, the intelligence to change a routine, the defensive scramble, that is the real story of Italia 90. Gascoigne was a safecracker who accidentally set off the alarm and forced the rest of the team into a shootout with the guards.
That's an interesting point. Though I would frame it differently, he set off the alarm, but he also drove the getaway car.
Well, we'll have to agree to disagree there.
But let's follow this team to its ultimate test, the semifinal in turn against West Germany. This is the match that truly defines the tournament in the public memory. And I know exactly where you're going to go with this.
Because it is the match that exposes the limits of individual emotion.
It is the match where the heroism is inextricably linked to tragedy. This was Gascoigne at the absolute peak of his powers. He is 23 years old, and he is facing West Germany's Lothar Matthäus, who is arguably the best, most complete midfielder in the world at the time.
He was incredible.
Before the game, Robson pulls Gaza aside and tells him that Matthäus is the key issue. Gaza just looks at him and says, "Boss, no problem. Leave him to me. Go and smoke your cigar."
Which is just classic Gascoigne.
And he wasn't bluffing. He dominated that midfield in the first half. He went toe-to-toe with a titan of the game and dictated the tempo. But then we arrive at the 90th minute. The score is tied 1-1 in extra time.
Here we go.
Gaza loses the ball, tracks back with that relentless energy we've talked about, and clatters into Thomas Berthold from behind. The Brazilian referee, José Roberto Wright, reaches into his pocket and pulls out the yellow card.
Which we must acknowledge was the unequivocally correct decision under the laws of the game.
But the consequence of that correct decision was devastating. Gascoigne had already been booked in the round of 16 against Belgium.
This second yellow meant he would be suspended for the World Cup final should England advance.
It was a huge blow.
Bobby Robson captured the sheer crushing gravity of it perfectly. He said, "My heart hit my shoes because I realized instantly that was the final for Paul Gascoigne, out. And that's a tragedy for him, me, the team, the country, the whole of football."
Robson always had a way with words.
Gascoigne's tears in that exact moment defined the match. He realized his childhood dream was dead. The camera zoomed in on his face, his bottom lip going. Yet, despite that utter heartbreak, he continued to play his heart out for the rest of extra time.
He did keep playing hard.
He told himself, if I'm not going to make it, I want the other players to get there. That incredible vulnerability, coupled with his refusal to quit, cemented his status as a hero.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered how focusing purely on Gascoigne's tears practically erases the immense, monumental effort of the rest of the team that night?
I don't think it erases them.
You frame it as a personal tragedy for Gascoigne, but the true tragedy was the team's ultimate failure to advance, despite playing arguably their best football in 25 years.
They played brilliantly, yes. No one is denying the quality of the football.
They didn't just play brilliantly. They outplayed Franz Beckenbauer's West Germany in normal time. The Germans only scored through a wildly lucky freak occurrence when Andreas Brehm's free kick deflected heavily off Paul Parker and looped agonizingly over goalkeeper Peter Shilton.
It was a very unlucky bounce.
But England didn't collapse. Lineker scored a brilliant equalizer in the 80th minute, flicking the ball off his thigh and driving it home into the far corner. And regarding that famous yellow card, referee Jose Roberto Wright later stated he was simply applying the laws to a reckless tackle.
He didn't even notice Gaza crying at first, right?
Exactly. He didn't notice Gascoigne crying until he watched the television footage days later. The laws are the laws, regardless of the emotional narrative.
But the context matters. The German bench leaped up instantly to pressure the referee. Berthold rolled around as if he'd been shot. It was a deeply cynical moment designed to get Gascoigne booked.
Perhaps it was cynical. But the real tragedy of Turin wasn't a yellow card for a late tackle. The real tragedy was the collective mental disintegration in the penalty shootout that followed.
Ah, the shootout.
That is the overarching systemic issue with English football that began that very night. Stuart Pearce, a man affectionately nicknamed Psycho, who had been taking pressure penalties his whole life, steps up and his shot is saved by Bodo Illgner.
It's hard to watch even now.
Pearce later said his entire world collapsed in that second. And then Chris Waddle, who had just cut off his famous mullet before the game, steps up and launches the ball into the Turin night sky.
You know, Gascoigne was actually scheduled to take a penalty in that shootout.
Exactly. He was scheduled, but he was so emotionally drained, so completely caught up in his own personal tragedy of the yellow card, that he couldn't take one.
He was just completely spent.
Dietmar Hamann, the former German midfielder, later pointed out a fascinating cultural difference regarding this match. He noted that if a German player had gone to pieces emotionally, like Gascoigne did while the game was still tied, it would have been viewed as a national scandal.
A scandal?
Yes. It would have been seen as an abandonment of professional duty. Instead, England glorified it. By focusing solely on the tears, we ignore the incredible tactical brilliance of the 120 minutes prior, and we ignore the agonizing shared heartbreak of the shootout.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're applying a cold utilitarian logic to an event that was fundamentally intrinsically emotional.
I'm looking at the reality of winning tournaments.
But Dietmar Hamann's perspective is exactly what English football was trying to escape. That rigid, robotic expectation of performance is what made this sport so joyless and toxic in the 80s.
Joyless, perhaps, but effective.
Gascoigne didn't shirk his duty. He was a human being whose heart had just been broken on international television. He wasn't glorified for failing. He was glorified because he showed the British public that caring deeply, even to the point of breaking down, was entirely acceptable.
Caring deeply is commendable, but caring deeply doesn't win World Cups. West Germany cared deeply, and they also scored every single one of their penalties.
That's a fair point, but
look at what actually aged the best from this tournament. Look at the mechanisms that changed the sport forever. It wasn't the emotion. It was the realization that structural adaptations were urgently necessary. Do you know why the back pass rule was implemented soon after Italia '90?
Because the tournament was too defensive?
Because the tournament was unwatchable at times. Teams were literally passing the ball back to their goalkeeper, who would hold it, drop it, and pick it back up just to waste time and kill the clock.
Yeah, it was pretty cynical.
It was so cynical that FIFA had to intervene and change the rules of the sport to save it. Furthermore, the Premier League was born 2 years later, turning the sport into a heavily structured, multi-billion-dollar, globally televised enterprise.
The landscape definitely shifted dramatically.
The legacy of 1990 is structural metamorphosis. The underdogs showing their teeth, like Cameroon's incredible run, proved that the global landscape of football was widening beyond Europe and South America. England's near miss proved that they had the tactical chops to compete, but severely lacked the psychological edge in shootouts.
That's the historical reality.
It is. Gascoigne was merely the aesthetic wrapping paper on a highly pragmatic, deeply flawed package.
Wow, okay. I have to push back incredibly hard on aesthetic wrapping paper. To summarize my position, you simply cannot divorce the structural metamorphosis of football in the 1990s from the emotional revolutions sparked by Paul Gascoigne.
You think one caused the other?
The Premier League doesn't explode into a global entertainment behemoth if the public doesn't fall back in love with the game first. You need the artist to draw the crowds. Gascoigne was the undisputed hero of Italia 90.
He was the highlight reel.
He was the emotional and technical force who dismantled the toxic, violent reputation of English football. Through his pure, vulnerable brilliance, he served as the safecracker, who didn't just break the team out of a defensive shape, but broke a fractured nation out of its own cynical shell.
Well, and to summarize my stance, while Gascoigne undeniably provided the aesthetic highlights and the unforgettable television imagery, the true, enduring narrative of Italian 90 was the collective resilience of a team under siege.
Under siege from the press, definitely.
Yes, it was the tactical adaptations of Bobby Robson, a man who was vilified by the media, but outmanaged almost everyone on the world stage. It was Gary Lineker's calculated brilliance under pressure, deliberately changing his penalty routine against Cameroon.
Those were crucial moments.
It was the dramatic, shared heartbreak of a penalty shootout against West Germany. The team's overarching collective drama was the actual engine of the tournament. Gascoigne simply happened to be the brightest spark plug.
It seems we will always view this tournament through two very different lenses. But we can certainly agree that Gascoigne's tears and the team's unexpected, grueling deep run are permanently entwined in football history.
Oh, definitely.
You really can't tell the story of one without acknowledging the other.
Absolutely. The complexity of historical sporting moments always requires us to examine multiple angles. You have to look at the standout individuals who capture our hearts, but you must also examine the collective structures, the tactical realities, and the systemic shifts that actually dictate the outcomes.
Exactly.
There is so much more to explore in the historical accounts of Italian 90. I mean, from Cameroon's historic run to the final days of the Cold War playing out on the pitch with teams like West Germany and Yugoslavia.
It leaves us exactly where we started. Looking back at that summer, we see a sport stepping out of the dark ages and into the modern era.
It was a massive turning point.
But whether you see the gears of a resilient machine finally clicking into place to secure results, or you see the single devastating tear of a 23-year-old kid that completely changed the culture of a nation, well, we'll leave that for you to decide.
A monumental shift, no matter how you measure it.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.